Chapter 14. Waking to the smell of coffee and flapjacks, Derek smiled, recalling traces of one outlandish dream involving an older Andy. Expecting to see the old red barn out his second-story window, he opened his eyes and sat up in a panic, realizing it wasn't a dream at all. It was his first glimpse into a world that Andy spoke about the prior evening, her words reiterated in his thoughts. "You just don't know, Derek. You really have no idea." Mulling over the rampant barrage of what-ifs and what-nows, he felt his pulse quicken and, for the first time in recent memory, had no bearings for what on earth to expect. The lack of solid footing in his current circumstance lent itself to a rising uneasiness. After taking a minute to reorient himself sitting silently, he came to rest on one soft, reassuring thought. A second later, her voice carried into the still air where he sat, listening to the sound of not just a familiar voice, but her voice at the top of his morning had warm fuzzies chasing away all apprehension. A chord struck in his heart as he listened to the melody of her tone while she milled around downstairs, preparing breakfast with Pradicus. In that single moment, disquiet melted away into serenity, and he found himself challenging whether he would actually want to go back. Gazing around the room, he took in all he could of Pradicus. The thought occurred to him that if for some reason they did stay or had to stay, Pradicus would probably fall into a father sort of role for Andy, which followed logically to father-in-law. He smiled, then shook it off, curtailing the notion. "Hey, sleepyhead," Andy said in a welcoming tone. "Now what would put a smile like that on your face this early in the morning?" Her sudden presence startled him and, in his estimation, was the reason for the unexpected myriad of thoughts and feelings rushing through him like a current. Wondering if she could have possibly read his thoughts through the smile, he grimaced and looked away. He quickly recovered, though, a strength on which he played well. I was actually thinking about you." She stepped into the study with a grand look about her. "Really? Please do tell." "The truth?" "Of course," she said, emitting a soft glow of anticipation. "I was thinking that if, you and I didn't go back for whatever reason, that there's a pretty good chance that, well, you and I, would probably become more than good friends and move on to the next level." He watched her try to hide a look that, at least in Derek's estimation, piqued her interest. "Yeah, like getting to be neighbors and no longer good friends, but super good friends forever." "Smart, Alec," she said, shaking her head with a grin. "You're what my grandfather calls a whippersnapper." "What do you mean? You wanted the truth." "Truth, my horse is behind. Since when have you ever stood on the truth? Come on down. Breakfast is ready," she said, turning away, chuckling. She made it down the stairs when she heard him retort, "You have a horse." Finishing breakfast, Derek pushed his plate away. "Pradicus, how do you cook so well without the modern stove?" he asked. "I must say it is a process, and a process one must learn quickly if one wishes to enjoy the food he prepares." "We've cooked everything, haven't we?" Pradicus Andy stated proudly. "Ah, yes, and the pleasure has been all mine to have thy company." Derek looked at Pradicus squarely. "So you've been trying to get into that room upstairs, huh?" Andy gave him a kick in the shin, along with an equally painful glare. The table became quiet. "Why, yes, my boy," Pradicus answered. "He didn't mean to bring it up, Pradicus. Did you, Derek?" she said with firm intention. "Well, I only ask because—" He was interrupted by another kick in the shin. "I happened to mention it last night, that's all," Andy said, cutting in. "I probably shouldn't have, but it kind of stands out when you're up there." Derek directed an offended scowl toward Andy. He turned his attention to Pradicus. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry." No, it's fine," he answered. "The room was once a map room filled with all sorts of charts, plottings, and such." He began fiddling with his beard while a blank stare caught his gaze. "One day, long, long ago, mine brother and I had a falling out. The house belonged to me, but through a chain of events set in motion by his evil mind, he stole it out from under me. In the process, he thought to have killed me. It was none but the mother of that young kraken who saved me from Lignordre in the clutches of my malevolent brother. After he realized I was still alive, he made a final attempt to finish me. He chose this very house with which to carry out his purpose. I managed to gain the upper hand, at which time he retreated into the map room. He locked the door shut. Never had he known me to be a life-taker, but he knew all too well I was prepared to take his that very day. He remained in the room for several days. I was sore afraid he would destroy my every work, so I kept from breaking down the door. Knowing he would need to exit at some point, I locked the door from this side and placed a group of crossbows just off the window to hinder his escape there. He sealed the window from the inside with a resin or tar to keep the window from shattering, as well as to keep me from seeing in, even though I haven't had access to it from the outside. He became quieter as the days drudged on. I didn't know whether he eventually fell dead or simply loomed amidst the darkness. I pleaded with him to come out and make amends, but was never answered. I decided I would break down the door. I needed to. After repeated attempts, I realized he had an extended lock in place, a lock of supernatural or perhaps magical operation. Finally, I thought to smoke him out. I forced enough smoke into that room to kill 10 bears. I concluded he must have died despite my attempts to reconcile. But as we all know, a body without life produces quite the stench. His eyes regained focus and alternated between the two of them. Mine brother is alive, and he isn't in that room, and I have yet to open the door. Where he went and when he left is still a mystery. I do know that only since then has he been using Lignordre for wormholes to hunt people. Hunt people, specific people? Derek asked, his brow furrowed. What would be a reason for such a thing? Pradicus, venting his anger for the locked room, gripped the cup before him, squeezing it, obliterating it with a brutal glare. "Tell me, Derek, what didst thou find in there?" he asked, without so much as the flicker of a lash or stir of an eye. The question came so unexpectedly that Derek completely lost his breath. His eyes, widely held in startle, held fast to Pradicus's suddenly firm expression upon him. I, he stammered, searching for a way out. The typical quick recovery eluded him. Pradicus slammed a fist onto the table. "What didst thou find?" he demanded with authority. "Journals. Nothing else. Well, maybe a map or two." Andy sat dumbfounded. A whisper passed her lips. "You were serious?" "Show me," Pradicus exclaimed. "Well, I didn't open the door. I don't know how or why it opened." "Show me," he repeated, standing up. "You're the key to all of this, young man." He leaned in toward Derek. "You will stop Felicius." Derek swept his eyes across the table to meet Andy's. The general sense of her expression emanated well beyond flabbergasted and on to holy Jiminy cricket. Derek led the other two up the stairs to the locked door. It wasn't resting open as it had been the night before, though the eeriness remained. The door seemed to know they were coming. It was as if it dared them to approach. Derek wondered if the slit between the frame and the top of the door had suddenly begun seeping obscure shadows, somehow unable to contain the thick, billowing darkness stirring from behind the door. If Derek didn't know better, he'd have sworn he felt for just a moment a sudden awareness that at least one of the other two he was with was vehemently unwelcome. Holding his breath, he grasped the knob gingerly, turning with a cringe to look over his shoulder at Andy while he did so. Anticipation swelled as their eyes met. She nodded slightly in a gesture to proceed. He glanced past her to Pradicus. The man's stern countenance gave Derek the impression that suspense had given way to concern. He turned back to the door, exhaled, and with a firm squeeze rotated the knob. Pressing his shoulder into the door, he nudged it. It objected. He stole a quick half look over his shoulder and then cleared his throat, beginning to picture what may lay in wait for him on the other side. "Come on, Derek," Andy asserted. Derek mustered his courage and gave it a heartier jarring. The door gave an inch. His amulet offered a dim glowing. "Just give it a man-sized push." Andy declared, driving herself into Derek's back. The amulet exploded into a radiating green illumination and then was suddenly and mysteriously snuffed. He retorted, falling into the door along with her and then onto the ground as the defiant door was thrust open. Papers scattered abroad amidst the whirling dust. Andy sat herself up while her eyes traveled the room. "Wow," she said. "It is a journaling room." Pradicus stepped in, hesitant, cautious, scanning every detail. His attention fell on the new little door in the wall. He lunged toward it, tearing away at every obstruction between himself and the anomaly. Blast. I should have known. Having no knob or lever, he ran his fingers along its edges and then rammed it several times with a shoulder, followed by a few determined kicks. Blast. "What is it?" Andy asked, taken aback by the unexpected outburst. He turned to her. "I need something the material Jake described months ago. The explosive. Dynamite," she suggested. Yes. And to use dynamite as a reference, Andrea and Derek, what we've accomplished here today is the lighting of a fuse, and a short one at that, I'm afraid. Derek, I do not think Velicious counted on my presence here. I believe we have just changed everything." Andy and Derek exchanged looks. "We haven't much time," Pradicus said, beginning to peruse the room. "Pradicus, what do you mean?" Andy asked. He stopped in front of the volume that Derek had laid eyes on the evening before. He cleared a thin layer of dust with a quick, firm blow. Derek watched him skim over the pages. The memory of seeing his name within the very same pages began to haunt him. Feeling like a pawn at someone else's hand of play, he clenched his teeth. The words simply fell out. "How do you know? How in the heck? Did you know to expect me?" The cynicism in his voice grabbed Andy's attention. "Whoa, what's going on? Why all the excitement all of a sudden?" she asked. "Ask him," Derek replied. "What's with you, Derek? You're being kind of rude." "Remember last night when you found me standing at the window in the study?" She nodded. "I saw something. More like read something. I was so floored that it, well, changed everything. You're not making a lot of sense right now, Derek. What's all this about? Tell her, Pradicus, what's sitting right in front of you that you never told her about." Dismissing fearful thoughts of sedition left and right, she directed herself toward Pradicus with a loyal demeanor. "It doesn't matter, Derek," she said. "Whatever you saw or thought you saw has a reasonable explanation." "Oh, you don't understand," he retorted. "Derek, you're being extremely rude. Now drop it," she asserted. Pradicus closed the journal, then whisked away with it under his arm so quickly that the underflow gust from his gliding morning robe left the floor whirling in dust. Andy took another mesmerizing glance around the room, landing her gaze on Derek. Without a word or acknowledgement, with the exception of a scrutinizing squint, she turned on a heel to exit. "Wait, Andy, you have to know what's really going on here. It's not at all what you think." She held her stance, facing away from him. "How would you have any idea what I really think or know?" she said. "Honestly, Derek, I'm not who I was, and you've only known who I am now for what, 12 hours? She glanced over her shoulder. "There's a lot you don't know," she muttered sourly. Then she proceeded out of the room. While standing quietly amidst the stillness, a tingling sense lingered about him, a feeling that clutched his inner soul, screaming he was no longer alone. It accompanied the scent he'd smelled earlier, barely discernible, trailing away as quickly as it had come. An unfamiliar acuteness had him focus his attention straight away on the small door. As he approached it, his amulet, unbeknownst to him, began to flicker dimly once again. His eyes lit up as the perilous curiosity of it all enthralled him. He stopped 2 feet short of the door, however, studying it, suddenly convinced that an unfriendly presence loomed on its opposite side. His stomach turned at the thought that a mere arm's length separated him from whatever it was and yet engrossed him at the same time. The sound of a sudden cold thud from the other side of the door made him jump. He turned to take a step but inadvertently lost his footing. He didn't stumble just anywhere, however, but fell toward the small door and, in fact, into the door face first. He quickly pushed himself away, staring the door down as if it had something to do with his tumbling into it. A bit startled, he slowly backed away when suddenly a blot of condensation, like heated breath on a cold window, appeared on Derek's side of the door, followed by a second, more resounding thud that shook the floor. "Stick it in your ear," he unconfidently snarled, then hastily left the map room. The door slammed shut behind him as he left. He quickened his pace and nearly leapt down the stairs, landing with eyes scanning the room for the other two. "Andy," he said, spotting her across the room. "What's, the plan?" She stood in the corner where she kept her bedding and clothing. A partial wall separated a similar area where Derek assumed Pradicus slept. "Leave me alone," she replied. "Am I missing something? I mean, didn't you say you two have been trying to get into that room for months? I would think you'd be a little appreciative." "Oh, is that what this is about, Derek?" she said, busying herself with minute detail touch-ups. "Well, here you go. Thanks. Will that suffice?" "No, it won't. What the heck is going on here, Andy?" The door opens, and the two of you suddenly take on entirely different identities. "I'm not the bad guy here. You were a real jerk up there. Sometimes I just can't stand you, Derek. Sometimes I wish I never knew you, and right now, I wish you hadn't come." "What do you mean?" "Andy, I don't get it. If I've done something so bad, tell me what it is." "You've ruined everything, Derek. We had a good thing going here, and then you show up and shatter it right in front of me. Why'd you have to come here?" "What? And you think I wasn't making sense? What the heck do you want from me?" "Just go back to that room where you belong." Watching as everything in his new little world began to implode around him, he took a flabbergasted step back, his eyes dancing about the room. They fell on a familiar partial page. He snatched it and held it up in front of Andy. "This is where we were last night. Romans. Remember?" She swept her eyes away with disinterest. He took the sheet fragment and began reading. "Do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." She glared at him with a blazing disgust, but as he continued, her eyes found solace. He scanned the print for something, anything he could easily understand, and then continued. "Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing constant in prayer." Preparing to continue, he looked up to find her in quiet tears. He slid the paper into his pocket and reached for her. Stepping into his arms, she rested her head against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Derek. Please, please forgive me. I didn't mean any of what I just said. In that room, it's like something got a hold of me. I didn't even see it until you started reading." That's the power of the Word of God, Derek. It keeps you balanced. It keeps you, well, it keeps you. I had my guard down, and whatever it was knew so. I'm just glad you're back. Derek, I need to share more with you on that later, but right now, you need to tell me what you saw in that journal. I think Pradicus is in trouble, like he wasn't supposed to find it yet. "Well, long story short, someone knew," he said with pause, and then he continued, "that I was coming. That's true. I told Pradicus long ago to expect you." "No, I mean someone planned for me to be here." She cocked her head. "What do you mean?" "My name was in the journal, which means my name's been in that journal since before any of this, before you got here to tell him about me." A blank look washed over her face, which, after weighing a few considerations, fashioned into a concerned frown. "Are you sure? It was dark in there. Maybe you're mistaken. Not only my name, but Jake's also." Silence filled the room as the declaration shook her. "What?" she asked, placing an open palm against her forehead. All of this has been part of some stinking, conniving plan? Well, I thought you already knew that. Her eyes raced across the room from one spot to another as she tried to put pieces together. Well, I did, I guess. Just not quite like this. This is different. All of a sudden, we're talking maniacal, cunning, planned out. She was quiet for several seconds. Did you see my name? She asked with a determined stare. Andy, at this point, I don't really think, he said before she cut him off. Did you see my name? She snapped, wondering if any purpose surrounded her lengthy absence from family and good old Nebraska normalcy. He was reluctant to answer, seeing where she was going with it. No. Fury arose out of her determined countenance. That reptile-loving bastard. Andy Derrick said while fishing for something more to say. I'm not even supposed to be here. I've been through hell and back by accident. Who's saying that? Just because your name isn't in the journal doesn't mean you're here by accident. He watched her pick up a glass and hurl it against a wall. It exploded into pieces and hundreds of shattered slivers. She picked up another and drew her arm back. Whoa, time out. That isn't the way to handle this. I'm sure Pradicus has a good idea of what's really going on. Pradicus? Yes, of course. He must know something. She called to him, but he failed to answer. She stepped out onto the porch and then called for him again. Look, I thought we had something to do today. Remember our plan? She hesitated for a second, then walked to the edge of the porch and called for Pradicus yet again. Andy, his brother doesn't know what we're planning. We can talk about this on the way. We've got to get going if we're going to have any chance of getting back home. She stopped and looked at him. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Now here's what we need to do first, he said just before a sudden thundering rumble distracted him, followed by a surging boom that penetrated the air from above. Water from the river immediately ignited up and out in a reddish-orange hue like an underwater atomic blast. A second ball of fire struck the river and exploded. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, an enormous long-necked winged beast swooped in and hovered 60 feet above the river's shore. A ferocious roar escaped its black orifice, followed by a lengthy mass of fire. The wind from every flap of its widespread wings gusted downward upon the treetops. Pradicus, it's Lignardre! Andy yelled in a panic, rushing into the house. Ominously, Derrick looked onward toward the mythical beast. He stepped to the edge of the porch, watching in terrified wonder. Beowulf circled above the great dragon, once again serving as the eyes for Velicious. Andy came bursting out the front door, back onto the porch. I can't find Pradicus! Derrick turned quickly and caught her in mid-stride into his arms. It's fine. I'm sure he's aware Lignardre's here. They heard Pradicus's voice bellow from above them. They stepped off the porch and into the front yard, ducking the wind-driven flying debris. They found Pradicus standing atop the house with his arms raised, speaking loudly to himself, hurling curses towards the dragon in a deep, authoritative voice. The dragon wrenched its neck and then dove towards the house, with Beowulf following close behind. Pradicus bent down and picked up a large crossbow. He took aim and pulled the trigger. The arrow rocketed forward, piercing its target with a deadly strike into the heart. The crow instantly fell lifelessly through the air. Blasted, defiant little cuss, he said through gritted teeth. Lignardre held up from its descent for a moment, watching its companion unresponsibly arrive at its final resting place. It then redirected into an ascending climb and continued until it reached the silvery mist on the underside of the clouds. Its eyes, fierce and unshakable, locked onto the shooter, its intended target. Then, in a furious plunge, the dragon pinned its wings back and dove toward the earth. As it neared the hills, it spread out its mighty wings and leveled out, brushing the tallest treetops with its underbelly, intent on closing quickly. It opened its mouth wide, heaving a blanket of fire upon the grassland, preparing to snatch its mark from the rooftop. Andy and Derek both dove for the ground. On a speeding approach with a single snap of its jaws, Lig Nar Dre took half the roof off. Andy careened her neck around to survey the aftermath. Part of one wall, a large portion of the roof, and Pradicus was simply gone. She jumped up and chased the dragon for several steps in sheer devastation. There was no sign of him. Pieces of roof fell to the ground, trailing the dragon's flight. Andy fell to her knees. Derek ran to her in a consoling effort. He scanned the sky as he held her. It's circling back around. It isn't finished, Andy. Do you hear me? It's coming back. She remained in her position, disoriented. Andy, we've got to run. It's coming back. Lig Nar Dre is coming back. She looked up at him with sopping eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen, Derek. She then lifted her eyes to see where the beast was. Derek's optimism began to fall. She glanced back at Derek and saw the switch in his eyes as his awareness of the inevitable loomed only seconds away. Both of them knew it was too late to begin running. In a high circling arc, Lig Nar Dre followed the same approach. Focused and purposeful, it found the two of them on the ground and then drew in a large breath for a final blast of fire. Let your will be done, O Lord Jesus. Andy mumbled through her sniffles. Thoughts fell on Pradicus, her friend, confidant, and father figure. Her lips curled into a large frown as the blank expression she attempted to keep collapsed into grief-stricken mourning. She covered her eyes with a hand and wept. A myriad of wonderful Pradicus moments dashed through her memory, but the one that leapt out at her was her most recent discussion with him concerning things she and Garen had been talking about quite a bit lately. She had approached Pradicus just days before Derek's arrival. Explain to me again why you resist so much, Pradicus. You're the sweetest guy I've ever known. You're giving, considerate, kind, and just an overall beautiful person. What in the world could possibly keep you from reaching out to God? It was the first time in their several brief discussions that Pradicus hadn't sidestepped the question. Perhaps something deep within him knew things were about to change. Andrea, I suppose the reason thou sees me as a good person is because I have tried to turn from mine past. I have committed unforgivable deeds, as well as witnessed the same, namely the assault and butchering of mine mother. I cannot forgive them for what they did. Therefore, I cannot ask forgiveness for what I have done. She called out to God in her terror. He did nothing. I see what God has done in thy life for thee, and I am happy for thee. However, thy God is not a God for me. I am sorry, Andrea, but I shall take that to mine grave. Well, I'm going to pray that he opens your eyes, Pradicus Andy said. I'll ask him to make sense to you someday, and then you'll forgive yourself for what you've done. When God changes your heart, you'll find it within yourself to forgive them for what they did to your mother. It's the kindness of a loving God which leads to repentance. Pradicus, maybe someday you'll see such kindness in me. Andrea, he said firmly but gently, I wish not to forgive them, but you do that, child. He grinned, then turned and walked away. Pradicus, she called with a tinge of concern. Forgiveness is freedom. He wasn't sure why, but that particular remark struck him quite oddly. He paused for a moment and allowed the word to settle upon his lips, as if never having considered it before. Freedom, he then continued on his way. Derek kneeled behind her, laid himself across her back, and then closed his eyes while his mind spun through a collection of their fondest memories together. He chuckled. Remember, Andy, the first time we went down to Crapola's Italian place? In her determination to be strong for what few seconds remained, the words took a moment to settle amidst a countless number of surging thoughts. Carpolas? She asked, trying to focus. Oh, yes, she answered in a sniffling laugh. I remember you getting stuck in the bathroom when they lost power, she added, giggling. Yeah, I never told anyone, but I had to sneak into the girls' bathroom in complete darkness for a roll of toilet paper. I crawled the entire way. I'm not really sure why. Oh my gosh, she said, hesitating, trying hard to stay distracted. Are you serious? My hand bumped into that young, really sweet orphanage lady, Sister Catherine, when I crawled under one of the stools. He started cracking up. She screamed something horrible when my hand touched her ankle. Let me tell you, you talk about losing your religion. Derek, was all she could manage before he grabbed her arms and squeezed. It's gonna be over quickly. Don't. Look, he said as the downwind surged upon them. A pillar of fire unleashed upon the two of them, consuming everything it reached, leaving a 200-yard band of destruction. The beast pulled up and with a fling of its tail, demolished an entire side of the burning house. 2 charred strips laid smoking across the meadow, stretching from where the two took cover all the way past the remains of Pradicus's house. Lignard Rey circled once, then soared westward in an ascending climb until out of sight. The dragon landed on its crest high up on the side of Broga Mountain. The horsemen on their steeds were assembled together there already. Lignard Rey made a few sounding gestures to the riders, then they unhurriedly turned and dispersed into the mountain. The dragon rested its jaw on the ground and made several regurgitating thrusts. A stone-like cocoon covered in saliva slid out from its mouth and onto the ground. It breathed on the object, which then began to soften. A body began to take shape as the shell around it melted away. The dragon nudged it a few times, then cupped it in its mouth and crawled off, entering the mountain through the large crevice. Only a matter of minutes later, Lignard Rey was in a descending drift in the midst of the cavern. It landed on a ridge and released a long, fiery breath and triumphant roar. Sporadic stones within the cavern's walls gleamed the heat and began to release light. As the particular stones brightened one by one, they charged others nearby, and within moments, the vast cavern was lit up in a remarkable array of illuminating white, green, blue, pink, and yellow stones. As the stones ignited into brilliance, they gave off a sweet fragrance that quickly filled the cavern. In single-line fashion, one following the other, the horsemen arrived through one of the passageways. Their stallions plodded across the muddy terrain toward a ledge overlooking the lake, upon which Lignard Rey stood. The horsemen gathered to the side of the ridge and waited. A few moments later, a ghastly figure stepped out onto a higher overhang opposite Lignard Rey's. The fiend took a long look around, then disappeared into a crevice. Chapter 15.